This program is brought to you by Stanford on iTunes U at Stanford University. Please visit us at itunes.stanford.edu.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me. Since it's a kind of intimate group, I can ask just a kind of informal poll. How many of you have checked out the Creative Commons website before coming here? Okay. And how many of you have seen our little cartoons there? Because I don't want to put you through it. Okay, only 2 of you. So I will subject you two to some of our cartoons, but during the talk. But so my name's Glenn, and I'm the executive director of Creative Commons. So just like a couple of kind of basic facts about us: we're a nonprofit. We're a 501c3, which means we're not the kind of nonprofit that runs ads against presidential candidates, right? We're a charitable organization. We don't do any lobbying. We don't intentionally do any litigation anyway. We basically just try and provide free tools and services to the public. So we're apolitical to the extent you can be in that kind of world. We used to be based here at Stanford. We started at Stanford Law School, actually. We were here for about 2 years in the basement of Stanford Law School. Never really officially part of Stanford or anything like that. We've always been separate. But the dean, Kathleen Sullivan, of the law school at the time, was a big supporter of everything Lawrence Lessig was doing, having just come to Stanford around 2000. And one of the ideas he brought with him from Harvard was the idea for Creative Commons. So as now part of the faculty at Stanford Law School. We're now up in San Francisco. But the easy way to think about kind of the 2 quick things of what we do is, one is if you're the kind of person who makes anything, essentially, anything copyrightable, which is pretty much anything, then we help you publish your stuff under terms that announce to other people that it's free to use under certain conditions. So it's sort of a some rights reserved copyright. So you'll notice as you go through these slides, we're big on like branding things. That's kind of what we're all about. So where if the big traditional kind of C is all rights reserved, we're CC, some rights reserved. And then the other thing we do is help people find that stuff. So that's a really kind of simple find, publish our model. So I'll quit talking for a second and show you a little cartoon that explains a little more of the background of sort of why we exist.
These are Jack and Meg White, also known as the White Stripes. They're a band from Detroit. They make rock and roll without a bass guitarist. This is Steve McDonald of the veteran band Red Cross. Steve thought the White Stripes could use a bass player, so he appointed himself. He took the White Stripes' latest album, called White Blood Cells, and re-recorded it, laying a bass track down on every song. Then he released the results as MP3s on Red Cross's website. He even made up a new album cover and title, Red Blood Cells. McDonald began putting these copyrighted songs online without permission from the White Stripes or their record label. During the project, he bumped into Jack White, who gave him spoken assent to continue. It can be that easy when you skip the intermediaries. Collaboration across space and time. Creative co-authorship with people you've never met. Standing on the shoulders of your peers. It's what the internet is all about. It can be that easy when you skip the intermediaries. But couldn't it be easier still? Not many of us are liable just to bump into Jack White and get the green light. And he's not going to let just anyone play the bass over his songs in any case. But what about other artists who might want you or me to play along? Shouldn't we be able to, if they don't mind? Enter one of the internet's most famous citizens. A face familiar the world over, a public identity rivaled only by a handful of corporate giants and global superstars, the big copyright C. Everyone knows what Big C stands for. Big C means all rights reserved. Big C means ask permission. Big C protects copyright owners and notifies the rest of us of their ownership. Time was when you had to put Big C on anything you wanted to copyright, or else it entered the public domain. the commons of information where nothing is owned and all is permitted. You had to put the world on notice to warn them. That was Big C's job, and it was a useful one. What changed? The law. By the late 1980s, U.S. law had changed so that works become copyrighted automatically the moment they're made. The moment you hit save on that research paper, the second the shutter snaps closed, the instant you lift your pen from that cocktail napkin doodle, your creation is copyrighted, whether Big C makes a cameo or not. So suddenly, there's no quick way of knowing whether something's owned or not. The new rules may be clear about how you get to own a work. You don't have to do anything, but they say nothing at all about how you should go about announcing that you want to allow certain uses of your work. So what? Well, if you're a digital filmmaker whose every frame must be cleared by an army of lawyers before making the cut, or if you're in a band whose label won't let you put a song on a file-sharing network, or if you're a professor trying to put together online course materials, or if you're a DJ chasing down permission to use every snippet of song in your sonic collage, if you're one of these people, then you know, so what? We interrupt this brainstorm to call the lawyers. You drop what you're doing and call all the lawyers. You ask for permission, even to use a work whose author doesn't mind if you use it, because you have no idea what the author's intent is. You ask for permission, even to share some of your rights. Or you venture forward unsure what your risks and rights are exactly. Or, in a haze of legal doubt, you do nothing. The bottom line, Big C is out of a job. The middlemen are not. Enter Creative Commons. Creative Commons wanted to find an easy way to help people tell the world up front that they want to allow some uses of their work. We called the experts, the U.S. Copyright Office, for advice. Their response? There's no real answer. Get creative. So we got creative. How? Our CC brand marks works that are governed by Creative Commons licenses, a set of standardized copyright licenses available free of charge on our website. We wrote these licenses so that lawyers and courts could read them. Then we translated them into a language you can read. And then we translated them into a language computers can read. Now, CC isn't meant to compete with copyright, but to complement it. It allows you to retain your copyright while granting the world permission to make certain uses of it upon certain conditions. If the Big C is like a red light, then CC is a green light. If the Big C says no trespassing, the double C says please come in. If the Big C says all rights reserved, CC says some rights reserved. So you can use the powers of the net to find works free to share and build upon, and to invite other people to transform or trade yours so that you can get creative, not only with what you make, but how you make it available, so you can collaborate across space and time, so you can be a co-author with someone you've never met, so you can stand on the shoulders of your peers, all without asking permission, because permission has already been granted. Creative Commons. Get creative. It's easy when you skip the intermediaries.
So that's a little cartoon we made a couple years ago that we've gotten a lot of mileage out of since. Didn't really expect to. And just a couple of things to kind of note, a couple of anecdotes about it. It's a little, it's a little didactic. It's kind of long, everything like that. But part of what we were trying to do in putting that together is really kind of demystify an incredibly complicated thing. Like, copyright is incredibly complicated. I can't pretend to know everything about it, but someone who does know actually everything about it, a guy named Paul Goldstein, who teaches at the law school right down the street, likes calling it copyright the new tax code. Like, that's the new thing. And the insane thing about that is it's not the new tax code in the sense that it's not regulating this incredibly complicated system of financials and all this kind of stuff, is that it's regulating expression, essentially. Like, the definition of what is copyrightable is something that's fixed in a tangible medium of expression. So you think about that, and you think about all the number of ways to express yourself now, in particular with easy publishing, easy software, things like that online, and you think about this federal law that is now really automatically applying in this sort of insidious way to everything you do, especially everything you do online. Every time you make a copy of something online, copyright law is being triggered, at least technically. And so what? It doesn't really affect your daily lives until you start to kind of reach out beyond the hobbyist circle. And the way that this little film is sort of a self-exemplifying artifact of that is that when we first put this together, I was reading the story in the New York Times about the White Stripes, and I was like, oh my God, this is the perfect anecdote, and we're going to use this in a slideshow, and then we're going to sync it up to the White Stripes music and use it to go talk about this lesson. And I never really imagined that it was going to be something we would put together into something that was all automated like this, we'd put online and spread around, or that we'd be using it 2.5 years later. But we are now, and we now have it on a DVD, and there's now a TV show that's playing it, or a TV station in New England that's playing it, and a few other places that are interested in showing it. And naively, when I didn't really realize what we were going to do with it, I thought it was going to be a hobby little project. But you used one of the White Stripes songs at the beginning of it, and then used the example of the guy playing the bass under it. And I thought, well, it's perfectly innocuous. Never even crossed my mind. It was really the first piece of media I'd ever put together with people. And then when we were putting together a DVD, people started asking, well, do you have all the rights cleared for this? And I was just mortified that, here I am talking about rights clearance stuff. And I was like, well, but geez, we're just telling the story. I mean, it really happened. It's a news story. How can you tell the story without the songs? So we contact the White Stripes management. I tried going through friends of friends of friends to talk to Jack White directly, like through his roommate at the time. I don't know why a rock star has a roommate still, but I tried doing that. That didn't work. Then I talked to the management directly, knowing exactly what the answer was going to be. The answer was no. So the song you heard at the beginning is not the White Stripes, as you may have noticed, if you know that band. So we took that out. I'm going to leave them in there. We left them in there, and we're going to tell the story. That's fine. That's a different issue, not a copyright issue. But just as an example of once you cross that divide into kind of when you really want to start publishing something widely, then all the kind of copyright boogeymen start rearing their heads. But anyway, so we put out the licenses that were talked about in the little film in late 2002, December 16th, 2002, in fact. And the basic thing they do is this. So the kind of slogan that describes them is there's some rights reserved copyright licenses as opposed to all rights reserved. So first, myth number one about copyright, that most people, what they think about copyright, and if you judge by the headlines in, say, like USA Today or the stories you see on TV about copyright, it tends to be this kind of monolithic thing. It's on or off. It's total copyright and protection, or it's piracy and anarchy and mayhem. And copyright is actually a full spectrum of rights. It's a bundle of rights, as a lawyer would describe it. And at least in theory, you should be able to exercise all those different rights to any extent you want to. The right to distribute the thing, the exclusive right to copy it, the exclusive right to make money off of it, the exclusive right to perform it, so if you play it on the radio or you perform it on a stage, the exclusive right to change it. So all those are separate, discrete things. And at least technically, you should be able to control those kind of like as you would the equalizer under stereo. Really, the only people who exercise it with that fine grain of precision are people with really expensive lawyers. So basically, Hollywood, New York, big publishing, big media companies. So we thought, well, as this cartoon lays out, there's got to be a lot of people out there, especially with the number of non-commercial publishers now developing and hobbyists now publishing, or perfectly self-interested, rational, shrewd publishers who realize that maybe it's not in their best interest to lock down every one of their rights. Maybe it's a good idea to maximize distribution while retaining all these commercial rights, that sort of thing, to put out a series of tools that they can use. So these are the kind of rights you can reserve under the basic licenses. So if I mark my work with the CC and put it on a website or publish it in a book, I'm saying to the world, you're free to copy my stuff and redistribute it, provided that A, you give me credit as the author, B, you don't make any commercial uses out of it, C, that you don't change it, no derivative works, or D, that you can make derivative works, but if you do, you have to republish the resulting works under the same license I gave you. So if you take my photograph and invert the colors or do something different to it, crop it, etc., republish it in a collage, then you have to republish the whole resulting work under the license I gave you. So these are menu here. You can kind of mix and match these. That's the standard kind of licenses we pick. So when you come to our site, you see choose a license. What do you want to do with your stuff? You got to ask some questions. And And we give you the license as the thing referred to in kind of 3 different expressions. The first is we joke as the human readable one, right? So this is with big icons, really just plain language summary of what the main license terms are. It links off down to the lawyer readable thing that goes on for pages and pages that was written by 2 very important law firms here in Palo Alto, Wilson Sonsini and Cooley Godward, who were lucky enough to have on pro bono retainer. So I certainly didn't write this. I'm only a few years out of law school. So these are like real lawyers that wrote this. And then the machine readable part, which is really interesting, and which I'll talk a little bit about. So the importance of the machine readable part is when you take the license, you get this little tag. So when you're publishing your work online, you attach this little some rights reserved tag to either a file, so it could be a PDF file, or it could be an MP3, or it could be your web page. And contained in that is a link back to the license. So when people come across your work, they see, oh, some rights reserved, what does that mean? They click on it. You go through and see the legal terms, which live on our site. But it also has in it the machine readable stuff, which is, the machine readable part is it's just like the human readable part. It's just written for different kinds of applications on your computer to read. Just a few tags that say, well, like it says here, it's pretty human readable actually itself. Permits, reproduction, requires notice, prohibits commercial use, etc. So you get the appropriate kind of machine readable stuff embedded in this tag. And what that does is, this was a little bit of kind of a pipe dream for us at first. We really kind of bet that this was going to work without really knowing that there was going to be any technology that would actually read this stuff. So there was about 1.5 years of some bit of terror on my part anyway, when we were populating the web with these little tags and had nothing to read them. Now, though, we do have something to read them. We have a prototype search engine that has now gotten really, really good. If you go to our site and click on Find and type in, say, this search, for example, flowers, images, I want to create derivative works, you get a list of all the sites out there that have pictures of flowers that are under Creative Commons licenses. And they're made it manifest what the freedoms are, freedoms and restrictions are that you can use them under. There's right now about 1 million web pages in our search engine, out of a known almost 5 million that we know have Creative Commons licenses on them. So we're beefing up the search engine, making it better. But that's the general idea here. The coolest one that you can do, that I've seen anyway, is we'd always said is kind of the ideal. Our board of directors told me, like, the ideal is to have a search where you could say, we want non-commercial photographs of the Eiffel Tower. And you could go to a search engine that would find you that. And that just seemed utterly impossible like 2 years ago. And now you can go do that and you get like a dozen sites. It's really, really amazing. And I myself deserve no credit for that at all. It's all our tech team and people who are up in San Francisco right now. And Francesca here, I want to introduce Francesca real quick, who's one of the newest members of the Creative Commons team, who lives down here, and so we came down, carpooled together, and she wanted to check out what the Creative Commons shtick was. So here it is. So another thing we noticed is existing technologies are picking up this machine readable stuff too. So if you go to Alta Vista, which is now owned by Yahoo, and you type in Remix Me, which is the name of a CD we put out, and say MP3 audio is the format you want to search for, we just kind of discovered that they're doing this. We didn't really plan it at all. You see the box around the copyright field. This is just like a normal search engine, but it searches actual media files, not just pages. So it turns up MP3s, or it turns up video files, etc. So it lists all the usual stuff you'd see in like your iTunes player or on your iPod or something like that, the name, the kind of format, the length of the song, etc. But it's also going into the MP3 and pulling out from the metadata, from the kind of comment field embedded in the MP3, the copyright information, which we put in there. So that link can be followed back to a web page that describes the license and everything like that. So we're working with these kinds of companies to try and get them to make it even easier to search in this way. So that's the kind of double strategy of the search. So to give you a sense of how it's grown since December 2002, these are a bunch of just kind of different measurements. It's really kind of hard to measure how we've grown because we don't keep a database of who uses Creative Commons. We bet everything on the search model. We said, we don't want to take data. It's too expensive to maintain data, maintain a database. You got all sorts of privacy messiness we don't want to mess with. So what we can do is kind of measure by traffic on the site and a bunch of different kind of metrics I'll run you through, and then also measure how many pages actually carry the licenses. So the thing about all these different stats, so this is daily requests, basically people receiving our little some rights reserved buttons on their sites. The thing to notice about all these different stats is it's about a 50 to 60% quarterly growth rate for each one of them. So weekly distinct hosts served, daily transfer of megabytes, basically just the amount of information we're pushing out there. weekly hits to our weblog and front page. So this one's slightly smaller growth rate, 30, 20%, which I'm a little offended by, but that's okay. We have to make our weblog more interesting, I guess. People aren't coming to us to read, obviously. They're actually using us, which is cool, but, you know, sad at the same time. These are the weekly stats for who gets the little Some Rights Reserved logos. And then just general traffic on the site. So these are the kind of stats based on searches. This is just going to Google and typing in, this work is licensed under Creative Commons license. And you get, again, 50% kind of growth rate. Just a general Google search under Creative Commons. Now this one's a weird one. It takes some explanation. So a backlink search is where you go to a search engine and say, show me all the pages that point to this page. So if you want to see everyone that's linking to your page, you could go to All the Web or Yahoo or AltaVista and say, okay, here's the URL that I want to see that people are pointing to. Show me how many pages point to it. And that's exactly how our license model works, right? You link to our licenses. They live on our site. So we're able to count fairly well. It's kind of a fudge, as this thing will show. But so right around the beginning of this year, January '04, we're about 1.5 million just raw pages out there that were carrying the little tag, that were linking back to the licenses. Then around the middle of the year, Yahoo bought All the Web, changed something about how they indexed the thing. You can sort of interpolate what the growth would have been in there during this weird period. But it jumped up there. So some of that is natural growth that we think, but some of it we're pretty sure was a change in how they index pages. But anyway, so now it's a little over 4.5 million pages. So that's less than a year later. That's the kind of growth it's been that are carrying Creative Commons tags. And that's, again, a little bit of a fudge because there's some padding there, because you could have every last page of a weblog, which could be thousands of pages, would be tagged with the button automatically. And those are technically 1,000 different little copyrighted works in there, but it kind of pads the numbers. But there's also a lot of undercounting. There's a couple of big sites, big academic repositories, big music sites with thousands of works in them that only really link back once in their terms of service. So until we get the search engine a little better, until we develop new ways to tag things more accurately, this is kind of the best we'll do, kind of order of magnitude style. Feel free to jump in and ask me any questions either. Like, I don't know if all this is kind of generally making sense, but this is an interesting statistic in that it just basically shows what the preferences are for people who actually use the licenses. So 95% pick attribution. Basically everyone's kind of vain, right? Everyone wants credit. 5% don't. We recently just decided attribution's standard. Like, we're not going to mess with this option if pretty much everybody wants it. And you can actually waive it if you want. It's standard now. Non-commercial, 75% pick that. A surprisingly small number of people say no derivative works. It's about 70% say it's okay to change my work. And then about half say it's okay to change my work provided you share it on the same terms. So it's kind of an interesting breakdown. This gives you a sense sort of the differential between the kind of monolithic copyright picture you see in kind of pop media and what people's real preferences are. So we kind of think this will map out what the kind of alternative copyright preferences are over time. And there's a lot of legal academics interested in collecting this sort of data. Some examples of who's using the licenses. The first adopters were all kind of hobbyists, but the real bread and butter was the academic community. And so here are just a few examples of people who've been using the licenses from almost the first day. The first one's Rice Connections. It's a project started out of Rice University in Houston, their engineering department. But they are basically used across disciplines now. And they're basically have created a course composer or a textbook composer. It can be used for either one. And if you imagine it as a kind of a big machine, on one side of it going in are course modules or chapters of books. Different kinds of learning tools, different kinds of pieces of syllabus that go in one side. They get Creative Commons licensed as they go in, and at the other end is a tool that helps professors or graduate students rebuild materials from all that's in there. And the licenses act as sort of the grease for the machine because you don't have to go back and ask permission at every phase. They're really interesting because it goes beyond Rice University. They're doing programs with Cambridge University. They're going to pretty soon start working with Foothill Dan's and a bunch of community colleges here in California. MIT OpenCourseWare is a similar project but less interactive. It's basically MIT saying hundreds of courses that are published, the course materials online anyway, are published under Creative Commons license. And they're seeing really interesting reuses of their stuff because it allows derivative works. their course is being translated into Vietnamese by a teaching program, a Fulbright program in Vietnam, translating into Hungarian. And they're happy as can be about that because it's basically spreading their brand, their expertise, and they still have plenty of revenue from students coming in the door, obviously, and from all their research. Berkeley Shares is similar to that, but it's from music school in Boston, and they actually publish little videotapes of lessons. So you can go to their site and download for free a 30-minute lesson where you're almost sitting there with like an improv jazz guitar instructor, and they'll say, okay, and then this is the modal approach or something like that, and they'll basically run you through something, or a lesson on how to record at home using Pro Tools or something like that. So they have a few dozen courses like that that are all Creative Commons licensed. And the cool thing about all this is that previously you'd have to have all the kind of corporate IP councils from all these different universities talking to each other first before all this stuff can get interchanged. But if they're all using more or less the same license, you can get all this content flowing back and forth, and these are no longer kind of islands. Some other examples from the humanities in particular, just this week, if you go to our site, there's an interview with a guy named Marshall Solins, I think is how you pronounce his name. I've never actually heard it out loud. But he's at the University of Chicago, very celebrated anthropologist. Who is Solins? Okay, good, thanks. He's a very celebrated anthropologist at the University of Chicago, and he runs a press called Prickly Paradigm Press, and it's sort of like an old-fashioned pamphlet press. And his idea was, well, the old-fashioned pamphleteers are exactly like today's kind of webloggers or do-it-yourself publishers online. So they're publishing their whole series, their whole back catalog under Creative Commons licenses now. There's an organization called Haystack, which is a group forming in humanities departments across the country to try and basically link up different humanities departments to use this sort of. They have some really ambitious technical projects that I honestly don't fully understand, but also on the legal side, kind of trying to standardize the terms on how they could share information. Another interesting way it affects humanities, there's a guy named, I really recommend you read his book or check out his site or his weblog if you haven't already, named Siva Vaidyanathan at NYU in the communications department. He's got a book called The Anarchist in the Library that's all about basically this kind of stuff, but there's one incredibly compelling anecdote he tells about. He was an American Studies PhD with kind of a focus on 20th century stuff. He wrote about kind of the history of copyright. And he and all his friends who were basically 20th century historians, particularly people who are media historians, are kind of the second-class citizen among historians in that they're constantly having to clear rights that people who work in pure text don't. So you basically can't write a book on advertising in the 20th century or commercials in the 20th century or paintings in the 20th century unless you have an incredible lawyer behind you to go clear all the rights behind everything you want to just talk about in the book, which is completely insane if you think about it. It's different with quotations. It's a lot easier. It's a lot more liberal. But that's changing too. So he's got some really great anecdotes about that, and it's worth checking out his book. He's got an earlier one too called Copyrights and Copy Wrongs that's also pretty amazing. And then an example here, just at Stanford, is the Student Undergraduate Research Journal, who took it upon themselves. It's an undergraduate self-run journal that took it upon themselves, came to us and said, how should we incorporate Creative Commons licenses here? We really think this is important. So they use them as well. So an interesting adopter from the area of science is the Public Library of Science. Pat Brown, who's in molecular biology here, I think, or biochemistry here, who is a really big deal scientist in his field. And Mike Eisen, who's kind of his equivalent at Berkeley, helped start this organization, which is an open access scientific journal. So the trend right now in scientific publishing is that subscriptions are getting more and more and more expensive for universities to subscribe to these things and for researchers to get them. It's essentially people are being locked out of scientific research by the price or by these access controls that scientific publishers are putting in place. So the Public Library of Science put themselves together and said, we're going to publish a totally free scientific journal. They've got some huge grants and some incredible scientists. A guy named Harold Varmus, who's a Nobel laureate too, is on their board. And they publish everything, these really nice, glossy scientific journals, one PLOS Biology, one PLOS Medicine, all of which are completely free to copy, free to re-commercialize. Like it's their dream to have some press in, say, a developing nation take their stuff and make a business out of it. make a business out of translating it and republishing it, just because it would put market pressure on the open access people and also because it's the right thing to do. So they're a really interesting place as well. Some examples of different books that use Creative Commons licenses. The first one, Free Culture, which is my boss's book. He managed to convince Penguin Books to let him sell the book from his site, but also give the book away for a free download in PDF. And he allowed derivative works, which means, and no one really anticipated what was going to happen with that. But within a few days, there were something like 5 different audiobook versions of the book where just fans of his, and there are a lot of them. He's a law professor with a huge fan base. It's really strange. Had just recorded themselves, reading chapters of his book and putting together the whole thing, and like really high quality stuff. People put together editable web pages of it so they could kind of argue about the text on the page, something you couldn't really do without a freer license. An example of a novel that's published under Creative Commons licenses. There's a guy named Cory Doctorow, who's a science fiction writer. Used to be up in San Francisco. He's now in England. And he publishes with Tor Books, which is the biggest, as far as I know, the biggest English language commercial science fiction publisher. Actually owned by Bertelsmann. I don't know if Bertelsmann knows that one of their books has been published under Creative Commons license, but it sells really well. And their theory was science fiction people will kind of dig this. It's kind of a science fiction thing to do. Copyright, as Cory says, it's like the whole copyright debate feels like this end of the world as we know it kind of thing, and that's the thing that science fiction writers thrive on. So, let me participate in this. But he's got a ton of sales, and he's actually done it with every book that he's published since. A couple short story collections and another novel. And then We the Media is a book by a columnist at the San Jose Mercury News named Dan Gilmore that's about sort of participatory media and how bloggers and citizen journalists, he calls them, are changing how big media report the news. And that's also under a Creative Commons license that allows work. So all these are big commercial presses that have allowed this to happen and have not seen the sky fall as a result. Flickr is an interesting example of a technology. We spend a lot of our time going around talking to different technology companies or web communities, getting them to try and build in the sort of Creative Commons option right at the point of sharing or at the point of publishing. Basically to get it on people's brains first more than anything else so that they see that, oh my God, this is an actual option. It is not just all rights reserved or, go to the poorhouse. So Flickr is an example of this. Flickr is a pretty interesting new photo sharing application. A little bit like a Friendster or social software situation like that, but all based around photos where people who are amateur photographers, some of them really good, some of them professional, share and comment on each other's photos. And they offer a Creative Commons license option. But we do that with a lot of different technology companies, and we're starting to kind of get over the hump on that. Our goal is to have it on, your desktop, to have it on, different sound editing programs, to have it in Microsoft Word. As soon as you send it up to the web or as soon as you hit save, it gives you the option. Another recent example from film is Outfoxed, which you probably have heard of. Film really critical of the Fox News network. And Robert Greenwald recently announced that he's licensing out all his original footage, all the interviews from the film under Creative Commons license, one that actually rewards transformations, but prohibits even commercial transformations. So you can actually take recuts of his interviews and put them in your own film and make a hit out of your film, but that prohibits commercial verbatim copy. You can't just take it all and reuse it and sell it. And his idea was, okay, I used a lot of footage from Fox without asking permission, or asking permission and being denied and then using it anyway. And he said, I didn't know how else to do it. There's no other way to criticize Fox except unless you show the stuff. He hasn't been sued yet for that, actually. He's got a pretty good case, but it's a little surprising that he hasn't, in part because I think the news networks realize this is in their best interest. They do this kind of stuff all the time themselves. But he said, in order to really level the playing field, and I'll take another step, and I won't ever assert a copyright defense on somebody if they try and take my movie and cut it up, and here I'm going to prove that by using this license. So he was kind of like saying, political arguments should be settled on the merits, not in court for copyright reasons, but that kind of stuff's happening. So we haven't seen any interesting reuses of this yet, but we really hope to. And we really hope to get a couple of kind of diametrically opposed ideologically movies to kind of prove the point that this isn't really about left to right. It's a totally different kind of valence to it. So this is the big newest thing we're doing. And when you came in, I was playing something called the Wired CD, which comes out next week. So the Wired CD has got, actually I'll pull it up, 16 tracks. These are the tracks here. They're all fairly well-known musicians from 5 or 6 different countries, some of them on major labels. And all the thing that all these tracks have in common, so that you can see the title of the CD here. It's called Rip, Sample, Mash, Share. So all these things are legal to do. You can take all these songs, you can stick them in your computer, you can take them off the CD that it comes with, you can email them to a friend, you can put them on a file sharing network. You can put them in a sound editing program and chop them up and take a drum beat out of something and put it in your own song. You can't use them in advertising. That's one of the rules. Without the artist's permission. We hope that actually someday one of these artists sells the rights because of the promotion this has got them into advertising. And only 3 of the bands said you can't use samples commercially. The rest of the bands, 13 of them, said you're free to take any little sound or snippet of these songs, put them in your own song, make a hit out of it. We don't care, royalty free. So this is a pretty interesting development, and it comes out Tuesday ships with Wired magazine. It'll be on the cover, and it's something like 800,000 copies. So the CD hasn't even come out yet, and we just heard this morning or last night that Billboard magazine, of all places, has recognized it as a finalist as Best Use of Technology by a Record Label, Wired Creative Commons, which is amazing because it really is not the technology so much. It's just like a legal license. And neither one of us are a record label. And the CD hasn't come out yet. So it was a good day to hear about that. And from Billboard magazine, like right down there in the middle of Hollywood. That was pretty fun. Yeah, please do.
How do you, so you said some of the bands have offered different rights to other to CD. How do you communicate that? Is that all metadata in the...
That's a good point, right.
Pick it up?
No, so on the CD itself, there's a web address that you can just basically type in and it'll take you to our page that we put up for Wired. It's not normally how we do things, but that has all the license information. But also the article explains it in pretty close detail, and the liner notes explain it. The same way you would any other CD, like it'll say all rights reserved in tiny print around the side, or it just kind of says here's the URL. We are trying to work with companies like the one there's a company called Grace Note. They're the ones that when you put your CD in your computer or different kinds of appliances or whatever, go and find all this information on the songs. It'll send it back to your computer. Trying to work with them and other companies that do that to have it show up, in the top level here. But they're not really even enough fields. There's no such thing, and so we tried to get that in there, but we couldn't. But what we will do is when the CD comes out and we put the actual tracks up on our site for download, people who, a couple weeks after the magazine comes down, those MP3s that we put up, we'll stick the license information in. And we're also talking to different kinds of technology companies, file sharing networks, to recognize that metadata. But it's always got to have, to be effective, it's always got to have the kind of human readable top level stuff. Otherwise it's impossible to get to, right? It's like the whole reason we did the kind of CC some rights reserved thing was to remind people of something that they've always kind of taken for granted and see everywhere, which is, because of that sort of become meaningless. So yeah, does that more or less kind of answer? Okay.
Is that Danger Mouse patent? That's not from the Gray album, right?
It's not. That's a great question. No, he wouldn't have been able to do that. No.
That's already...
Yeah, he wasn't able to clear any of that stuff. So the Gray, you all know what you've heard about the Gray album, right? Okay. No, that would have put him on the hook for 150,000 times 800,000, whatever that is, in damages if he'd have done that. Published it commercially, So no, he couldn't do that. Funny thing was, he was one of the first artists who said, "I don't want my stuff being sampled commercially." We're like, what are you talking about? You just made yourself off of exactly this thing. But we convinced him otherwise, or Wired did rather. So that comes out next week. Another kind of interesting aspect, and I'll go quickly through this, is us trying to internationalize ourselves and trying to more accurately localize our different services, because they're mainly based on U.S. law, the tools, the licenses are. And copyright law is similar enough in different places to where it doesn't matter because of treaties and things like that, but it is different. And so this process this is what the result looks like anyway. When you go pick a license now, you get to pick also the jurisdiction of your license, so you can say Japan. And we now you can go to our site, we have 9 different languages. 9 different languages, but also 9 different kind of legal versions as well. They're kind of literally translated, legally translated. This is the Japanese one. The idea is you take the lawyer readable part and adapt it to a different legal system, the same way you would adapt like a piece of software to a different computer system, but to have the same result. So the examples of ones we have now: Brazil, Finland, Netherlands, Germany, Taiwan, Austria, Spain, Canada, and then in draft I think we have about 12 more, and then kind of preparing the drafts about something like 30 more. And this is something we started about 1.5 years ago, and this was way more popular than we ever anticipated. All volunteers. We have 2 staff members in Berlin that help coordinate this, but basically we work with a law school or a law firm or a think tank or something like that in another country that's known for doing copyright stuff. And they take the license and translate it and fix it up to make it work within that, that jurisdiction, and then we go over it together and they put it up on the site.
Is the text of the license put also under Creative Commons license?
That's a good question. No, it's a really tricky one. So, yeah, so our policy on that is we don't even want to, despite the kind of whole automatic copyright thing, right? We don't even want to assert a copyright in legal text, because that's a bad thing. It's a bad trend to start. Like, law is all about, like, the best legal paragraph you can write is one that just borrows from everywhere, right? So it's a really scary thing to try and start thinking about copywriting contracts or any kind of legal boilerplate. So we're saying it's not even copyrightable in the first place. But we will. But the one thing we do say is, if you change it at all, don't call it a Creative Commons license, because people are relying on it being the one that they've come to know, and that we, in theory, would enforce through trademark, which is a different thing. That's more about quality control. So.
Does that mean that you control translations, control and approve?
No, I mean, there are people. You could do your unofficial. You could do an unofficial translation. I don't think we would call it a Creative Commons license, though, unless we knew you were at this kind of reputable institution that has been doing copyright for a while. We're not going to really stop anybody from doing something like that, I would say. But yeah, translations, that would count as changing it and then, yeah, putting their mark on it. But we haven't done a whole lot of kind of enforcement of any kind so far on anything we're doing. That might change before long, but that's where that is now. Another new kind of tool we have is a developing nations license, which is sort of like some rights reserved across geography. So if you're a publisher in a developed country and you want pretty free use of your stuff in the developing world, so for example, to encourage publishing in the developing world, but you want to keep yourself protected from your market being cut into in the developed world, this is the license that does that. So that's a pretty interesting new one that we worked with a guy who spends a lot of time on kind of WIPO issues. Another direction we're going in is moving everything we've done into science, or the model anyway, the sort of some rights reserved model into science. In situations where people don't want to enforce every last one of their rights, maybe patent rights in the scientific context, or rights in their data, just pure data, which in Europe are rights, but they're not here. They're slowly moving to becoming rights here. To offer them free tools to waive some of their rights, but protect themselves against being taken advantage of. So I should actually wait. I should explain this one before playing it. It's not a little movie, a short one. So the kind of upshot of all this is the kind of world we want to see is encapsulated a little bit by the next little movie, which we had a little contest where we said, make a 2-minute commercial about Creative Commons, and the best entry will get a Macintosh G5 computer, and second place will get a video camera, and third place will get an iPod. And we didn't really know what reaction was going to be. We were a little scared. And we said, basically, the rules are you either have to make all the stuff yourself, we encourage you to use Creative Commons stuff and public domain stuff. So the film that won, that came up here, by a guy at the University of Texas, which is my alma mater, Ms. Murray's alma mater. We were both humanities students as undergrads too, by the way. Is by a guy from the University of Texas that uses all public domain footage. It's all just found footage, most of it kind of government footage, so it's not copyrightable. It uses a sampled beat from a Creative Commons licensed track. It uses a sampled phrase from a speech by Lawrence Lessig, so as a law professor he gets sampled also, that loops through the whole thing. And then the music's original. And so he put this together and he clearly won.
Creativity always builds on the past. Creativity always builds on the past.
So that's that one. He pretty much nailed that one. That was pretty clearly the winner. He said it was the first time he'd ever done moving pictures too. He's normally just a graphic design guy. I don't really buy that, but he won. So the significant thing about that is like no royalties paid, no rights had to be cleared. I mean, he's pulling from I don't know how many different sources there. And normally he'd probably put the thing together and then spend the next month just on the phone trying to get through to people. Which is one of the most frustrating things I've ever done. I've just having done it for even a couple of songs in these little movies. So that's the cool thing about it. Totally royalty-free, kind of playground of creativity without having to clear rights. Just a couple of last things as far as pragmatic, specific things that we're moving into. Another thing we're going to do that has a little bit to do with kind of this particular talk, because it's being videotaped, and I'm going to sign a release saying Stanford can do whatever they want with it. I think I'll sign it. We'll see. We'll have to negotiate it. Is we're going to basically provide kind of form agreements for people in just this kind of situation to where when they give a public talk and they have to sign a release saying we can use this however they want, they can say, no, in fact, I'm going to license it under a non-exclusive Creative Commons license, and otherwise you don't get it at all. So they can just have it there on the spot. You can download it from our site. We'll give it to you. And a similar kind of form for graduate students, professors, et cetera, who are approached by a journal or for some other kind of publisher, and they can say, well, no, in fact, I'm going to keep my copyright on this, but I'm also going to non-exclusively license it, and here's the form explaining that. So basically giving people kind of template tools the same way you can buy a book on, tenant-landlord, with tenant-landlord documents in it, any kind of legal self-help form documents. And we can use that in a lot of different kind of contexts, and that's a new area we're going to get into before too long, and I thought it was just kind of relevant with the camera on and everything. So. So we'd be happy to answer any other questions. Sure. There seem to be two kinds of companies that we talk to. One's that's the first one that says, okay, show us exactly, here's our balance sheet. Show us how on the bottom line, somehow offering Creative Commons or using Creative Commons, in next quarter, we're going to show a profit. That's utterly impossible. Like, I have no idea. And those companies won't even, we hear that message coming in and we're like, whatever. We'll come back later. Then there's the other companies who are kind of like, they're a little more kind of a fuzzy approach to it, and they're like, this seems to be a trend that's developing, this is interesting, we know users are interested in this, there's probably some marketing advantages to doing this, and let's try it out. Let's just go in the direction of what's new, and this is innovative, and it seems like a good idea. And those are the ones we get by far the most mileage with, so that's the general kind of breakdown. Okay, so on the first day, we opened shop. We sent that little cartoon to the Motion Picture Association of America when Jack Valenti was there, who's the kind of the lifetime head of the Motion Picture Association of America, right? The guy who tried to ban his own academy from watching screeners of movies that were nominated for the Oscars, right? To just give you some context of where he stands on copyright. And he watched the little movie and sent us back a video that we have on a DVD, which I can send you copies of, which we'll probably soon have online. A little video, him sitting in the library, endorsing Creative Commons. It's like a 5-minute little speech saying Creative Commons is a great idea because it's all about freedom of choice and it believes in copyright. And we've definitely gotten some mileage out of that. And Hillary Rosen, who's the outgoing head of the Recording Industry Association of America, has also endorsed it. And she's actually going to have a column in Wired in this new issue basically saying why it's a good idea. So it's really hard for people to at least overtly disagree with, because it's, God, I mean, you really are a villain if you're disagreeing with this, like explicitly choosing to share some of your stuff. And I also think that there's definitely pretty innovative pockets of Hollywood that are interested in exactly this kind of thing. And a lot of people are doing exactly this kind of thing right now, just informally. I mean, there's tons of bands that intentionally leak their stuff before the album comes out because they know it'll pump up demand, or that maybe it's their manager's decision. There's tons of DJs and hip-hop artists and electronic artists who will essentially offer a sampling license for their stuff by putting out with their CDs or with their singles a B-side that is an a cappella track, or just the beats. And what else is that for? I mean, no one's going to listen to Eminem a cappella, right? I don't think. It's copyright violated, essentially, technically. So people get that it can be used. You can use your little rights for marketing chits, essentially, or use to kind of leverage them in clever ways. So I think it's because it's not trying to change the default rules, it's not threatening yet. So we haven't gotten too much friction from that. It's been, if anything, there's skepticism, like how relevant will this possibly be, or how big's the market for this? Interestingly, the biggest project we've had has been the CD. So two content companies, or two content kind of holders, Condé Nast, like old school media, right? Wired magazine decides to put out this CD, and 16 different artists decide to put out songs on the CD. It's a much bigger deal than we've gotten with any technology company. So that's a really weird little shift of late. So anyway. They came to us. They built this kind of course composer. They've been working on it for a while, and they hadn't really thought through any of the intellectual property stuff. And then they brought in this advisor, a really interesting guy, who actually is responsible for getting Solins on our site in the interview and getting him interested in Creative Commons, named Chris Kelty, who's an anthropology professor at Rice. But the group that he studies as an anthropologist is open source software geeks. So it's not like any geography to it. He studies them all around the world. What do they have in common and all this kind of stuff. So he's a real expert in intellectual property on top of being an anthropologist. And they brought him in because he was fascinated by this. He was like, yeah, this is going to be a bit of a rights clearance problem, guys. You're building this huge machine full of stuff authored by all these different people. And they just heard about us. Nothing official, actually. And we've talked to some people at the law school. Bernie Black, who runs SSRN, their Social Sciences Research Network, which is kind of a big closed network of, I don't know exactly what the term is for it, pre-proofs, I guess. Basically stuff in almost to production level that needs kind of peer review. You can put it up and have people read it there, or shop it to publications and things like that. Talking to him about incorporating Creative Commons licenses somehow. And that's beyond just Stanford, but he's here. And we're also talking to the Stanford Library about some really interesting stuff that is a lot more ambitious than what we've done so far. That's stuff I can't really actually talk about. Sorry. We are constantly doing a little bit of kind of curation. If you just kind of look around our site, we're really only kind of pointing to the cool stuff, generally. And we're going to do interviews with really the best people and best projects. So we do a little bit of that ourselves. We don't really have the staff to. I mean, we have 5 or 6 people, pretty much that we can count on full time. 2 people in Berlin doing something pretty unrelated, so we don't have the editorial ability to do that. Not yet, anyway. It's my kind of dream to start really a channel or a page or a magazine or something, that a record label that kind of puts all these things together, that points people to the best stuff. But this is where I think the real business model is, actually, in building off of Creative Commons stuff. And it's definitely not my idea. A lot of different business publications are saying this. A lot of different publishers are saying this. The real kind of way to make money off of this stuff will be to be the person who aggregates all this stuff, who recommends different things. And a lot of people are talking about this in general across the internet. When it becomes harder and harder to be an exclusive distributor, which is what free copying does to people, the real value is pointing people to the good stuff, right? So the real value is being able to recommend things. That's what people really want. They really want to be able to discern the junk from the good stuff. And so a lot of people are coming up with different ways of doing this. There's sort of, in the music world, a lot of different companies are experimenting with sort of cascading friend lists, where if you're linked up to all these different people and you know what music they like, you'll be fed recommendations based on what they're listening to. And in the peer review area, there's some really interesting stuff that I know Rice is thinking about and haven't gotten to yet, and that Public Library of Science is thinking about and haven't gotten to yet. And a lot of people are talking about this, and that is sort of post-publication peer review. Most peer review now is don't let anybody in the world see it until it's been through the grinder, right? Then put it out when you know it's perfect. Post-publication peer review would be put everything up. I mean, it's so easy to put everything up, like you're not going to stop people from putting everything up. And then using kind of distributed peer review technologies, or just a different kind of process, peer review it then, and then point people to the right stuff. It's incredibly easy to, and I know Rice wants to do this, to say, okay, I want to view connections, what's in connections, through the Marshall Solins lens. So basically that would involve, Solins goes to the site and says, I like these 5 courses in here. And if you go there knowing that he's your trusted guide, you put on the Marshall Solins lens, and you would only see that. You would only see stuff that he's recommended. Like, or, the National Academy of Sciences recommends these courses. Or in the case of music, U2, and this is exactly what they're doing by selling new iPods, U2 recommends these songs, including their own album, of course. But, have kind of these patron saints of particular genres who you can then trust, and then they'll narrow it down for you. So people are experimenting with that. It's definitely not perfect, and there's definitely still tons and tons of crap out there. But I think that I think that is the place where money is going to be made, and where really interesting models are going to be made around this stuff. That's going to be the real value people can add. So. We don't really have a relationship with Wired. I mean, the CD was completely their idea. I mean, so Lessig is a columnist for Wired, but this wasn't his idea. It was an articles editor there who just had this idea. He'd heard about the sampling license, which was a new license we had. It's the one that encourages, transformation, and thought, well, okay, Wired's job, their tagline is "What's next?" And he was thinking, well, Wired's job is to push and think about what's next, and so this seems like the right compromise for all the kind of lunacy of litigation in the music business. And so he said, about 9 months out, this is what we're going to do in the October issue. It got pushed back a month, but they started recruiting artists, and so they basically just said, here are the licenses we want to use, and we gave them a little bit of advice on how they worked, things like that. And then planned the concert with them once that was all in place. But I feel like they're going to whip out some kind of bill at the end of the day, and I'm going to be indebted for life for everything they're putting behind all this, because it's given us a huge boost. But they all really believe in it. It's great, up to the editor-in-chief. And it's interesting. It's really interesting kind of to show the kind of ideology of the ideological appeal of what we're doing. The editor-in-chief of Wired is a radical libertarian. So he was the business editor, the U.S. business editor of The Economist before he was the editor-in-chief of Wired. Just like the most pro-market guy you'll ever meet, and pro-civil liberties guy, so total strict libertarian. He loves Creative Commons because he thinks it's absolutely pro-business. It's the key to getting around the logjam of litigation and everything like that. And his quotes basically say as much. In support of us. And then at the same time, at the same event, you have Gilberto Gil, who's the Minister of Culture of Brazil, who's on the CD. He's Minister of Culture for a pretty much socialist government. Was exiled from Brazil at a couple points in his life for being too controversial during the dictatorship there. And pretty much left-leaning guy. Loves it because it's all about sharing and humanitarianism and helping out new young artists. So it has this really nice, hard to argue with mix of sort of self-interest and philanthropy, and people use it for completely different reasons, and that's hard to get across, that message, because no one believes it. But that's one interesting thing we've noticed. So anything else? I brought a few of these little flyers here. If you want to check them out, this is just the propaganda side. This is propaganda too, but it's more detailed propaganda. But there's one little thing here that I just wanted to point out that could get us in trouble, but it's fun to say anyway. And that's just, there's a little line on here that says that we believe copyright's not for lawyers anymore. And if you ever meet anybody, particularly in like humanities, or I'm a humanities person, and I was kind of technophobic for a while, and really couldn't believe I was in law school when I was there at different points. It really is true that copyright is like touching your life every day, like all the time you're online, it's there. If you produce any kind of media, you have this federal law looming over you. And it's really weird to think about when you think about kids being online all day, and the only federal law they ever interact with is copyright. It's like the new civics, right? It's much more important if you're 13 to know whether or not you're going to get sued by the RIAA and how to avoid that, than to know what separation of powers is, right? I mean, it's that relevant. So that's kind of a thing we always like to talk about. It's important to know about it because unless, I mean, in part because if you're a person like me who has this sort of disease where you see intellectual property everywhere you walk, like just going down the street or music coming out of a car or something like that, which I don't recommend. It really is kind of like that. The more we're kind of bombarded with media, and the more, well, you don't have to be totally Noam Chomsky subscriber to believe that it shapes kind of what you're thinking. So anyway, that's my little pitch at the end there. So thanks.
The preceding program was brought to you by Stanford on iTunes U and is copyrighted by the Board of Trustees of the Leland Stanford Junior University. Please visit us at itunes.stanford.edu.